Hey, it's Colleen. Welcome back to my channel. I'm super excited to show you my latest project. It's just right here. This dress was made from a pattern that was taken from an actual 1920s evening dress. The project was part of an exhibition that was put on by graduate students at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City. So I'm going to put some information on the screen right now and tell you a little bit more about that. The Roaring Twenties and the Swinging Sixties is a completely digital exhibition by the museum at FIT and the Graduate Studies Department. It was created by a team of graduate students, and it explores the similarities in women's fashions in those two decades, which is fascinating if, like me, you've never noticed them before. The exhibition showcases garments from the museum's collection, and it takes a look at the cultural and political influences on the fashions of the times. There's a lot of information, so don't skip it. The pattern for my dress was taken from the 1928 to 1929 black evening dress, and there are 4 other dress patterns that are part of the Plus Pattern Project. I'll be featuring one more in my next video. Don't miss this wonderful exhibition, and be sure to download and try out those free patterns. So this video will take you along with me as I work on this project. The opportunity came up to do a pattern test for these projects right as I was ready to pick my first project for this channel. And hey, you can't complain about an opportunity like that. So I agreed to test a pattern for this dress as well as one other, which you'll be seeing on this channel in the next couple of weeks. I've never done anything from the 1920s. I have an hourglass figure, and I just have never thought that that silhouette of being more straight up and down would look good on my body. So I thought, well, it'd be a good time to test that theory. The other thing is I've never used a PDF pattern before. I've always bought like regular printed patterns. So this was a good experience for printing out multiple pages of pattern pieces and taping them together and using them. I've also never made a new project like this without having full instructions. So the pattern had some notes about what the original garment was like, and how the seams were finished, and how the pieces were put together, but it wasn't like a step-by-step instruction. So there was a lot of things to figure out on your own. It wasn't so hard with this dress, but it was a lot harder for the next one that I'll show you. I actually really enjoyed that process. It's like putting together a puzzle without having the picture on the outside of the box, if you know what I'm saying. If you've been watching stuff on this channel, you know that I have recently cleared out a ton of stuff in my sewing room. I went through my entire fabric stash and got rid of about half of it, and then organized what I had left. I'll put the link to that video up here. Organized what I had left and had to really be honest with myself about what I was going to make in the future and how I should probably sew from my stash rather than buying stuff. So the first step was to look and see what I had in my stash that would be suitable for this dress. I was not able to sew it entirely from my stash. I did have the satin that's underneath, the silver stuff, but I didn't have anything sheer. And the original dress was made from chiffon and lace. So I didn't have any chiffon. I didn't even have any lace that was big enough. And so I had to go on a hunt for fabric. I wanted to be, accurate for the historical era that I was sewing for. I would have loved to have made an exact replica of the dress with silk chiffon. But once I started pricing it out, I just really couldn't justify it, especially on a project that I didn't think I would get a ton of wear out of in the future. Again, the 1920s not being my favorite era, I didn't want to invest a ton of money into something that I thought maybe, wouldn't come back out of the closet. I did end up finding a lace that was on Amazon. It's just a length of lace for 20 bucks. I actually love it. It's super soft, super light, super airy, and it's actually really, really pretty. And it had scallop borders along the edges, so I was able to use those for the hem, and it's just beautiful for the price. So it's nylon lace, and I bought 2 pieces of it, and I did end up using all of one and part of the other. So I'll put links in the description box down below for that. And what was interesting is right about the time I was finishing this dress and working on the other dress, there was a big discussion on Instagram about gatekeeping in the historical costuming community, and how it's okay to use polyester and nylon and synthetics, right? We shouldn't make it so that people can't get into historical costuming without investing a ton of money in silk, And I thought that was really appropriate because it has been something that's been keeping me from doing it. I see these beautiful dresses on Instagram, and it's not that I can't afford to buy nice fabrics. It's really more of I'm not ready to invest that much in my hobby, if that makes sense. I am learning. I've never made a corset. I've never made, you know, an 1850s big gown. So I don't want to invest hundreds of dollars in fabric only to screw it up. I'd much rather cut my teeth on things that I already have in my stash, whether they're synthetic or not. And then once I get kind of some skills under my belt and kind of get a sense of what I'm doing, then maybe I'll save up and invest in something special for another project. But I don't even have any place to go with this stuff. I am not part of a historical costuming community here yet. I hope to join one in the future when COVID lifts, but I don't have any events to go to. I've got no reason to make these things other than for a learning experience for myself and just having something pretty to look at. So I thought that the conversation was timely because I had been feeling guilty about choosing polyester satin from my stash and nylon lace from Amazon for this project. And I shouldn't feel guilty at all, and neither should you. Use what you have. That's sustainable too. That's historically accurate too. If I had been a woman in the 1920s and I had access to synthetic materials, you can bet your bottom dollar I would have had some in my stash and I would have used them. So I think, you know, we just need to keep in mind that people are people no matter when they lived. And there's going to be people who are going to want to save a buck and be a little thrifty in their choices. And then there are people who are absolutely happy and able to go out and buy the nicest fabrics around. So don't let fabric choice keep you from diving in. I didn't, and I'm really glad because I'm happy with the end result. I have something to show for my effort. I used up something from my stash. I'm not waiting for some magical day where I feel okay spending $100 on silk chiffon for a dress. I'm just going to dive in now. So anyway, that's a little bit of backstory, but let's get into the sewing because you're not here to hear about me. You're here to hear about the sewing. So let's take a look at the process. This dress is the sleek dress, and like all of the patterns on the exhibition website, it's a PDF. What you do is you download the file and you print it out, then you tape all of the pieces of paper together to create the pattern. Once it's taped together, then you cut it out and use it like you would any other printed pattern. What you see me doing here is measuring as I go because that grid is 1 inch and I just am making sure I'm putting the pieces together correctly. Well, I've been fighting with this mock-up for quite some time. I am very curvy and I am petite from the waist up. My under bust is also significantly smaller than my bust, and then I am small again on the over bust. So no matter how I monkeyed with this, I could not get it to fit without putting in a dart. There's just no way. I couldn't get the wrinkles to come out. I tried taking out some of the excess ease here. I tried lowering the armscye. Nothing was working. So this mannequin is not quite my size. It's a few inches smaller than me, but the proportion of where my bust apex is and my hips is still correct. So I pinned it in the center here. You can see I ended up taking a lot out of the back. So the front is still at the original seam line, but the back I took out quite a bit. And then I also, you can see here, I'm taking out quite a lot. So the front ends here and the back is here. So in order to get that to lay nice along the back and nice around the front without wrinkling around the bust, I am taking out some of the width of the back. So ignore this line here. I was just playing with some different seam lines. I'm gonna have to redraw the armscye and put in a dart. I just don't see any way around it. So I'm gonna give this a try and try it back on and see. Took apart the mock-up and transferred all the markings to Swedish tracing paper to make a fresh pattern piece. And I wanted to overlay them over the original pattern to show kind of what happened when I made the adjustments. So my initial thought was, because I knew my measurements differed from the dress measurement, was to add 2 inches to each side seam at the hips and an additional inch up at the bust. So I did that equal on front and back. In order to accommodate my 36G bust, I had to put in the dart. There was just no way around it. So once I put in the dart, I had to redraw the armscye and adjust the shoulder strap. And also, with that much extra in my front measurement, if I have a 42-inch bust, but only 18.5 inches of it is from, under my arm, across my back to the other arm, the rest of it's in the front, you can't apply the same adjustment to the front that you apply to the back. So you can see it's quite a bit different on each of these. I still ended up with 8 inches at the hips and 4 inches at the bust extra, but it's not evenly distributed between the front and the back. So that's kind of cool. But anyway, you can see I had to redraw the armscye. I had to adjust where my seam ended up. So this is the original seam line. There's my new seam line at the shoulder. But on the front, see where I had to put it? I had to change the angle and put it in a whole different place in order to accommodate the shape of my shoulders. And then once I did this, it took up so much length to accommodate my bust that this ended up being too short. I had to add length to get it back to the original hemline. So anyway, it's interesting to see the pattern laid flat and to see how much different the armscye ended up being as a result of adding in this dart. So now I have a finished pattern. I have to redraw the placement of the gores because the center of the side gore is here on the original pattern and it needs to be over here on my pattern. So I'm going to redraw these and mark the placement, and then I'll be ready to cut out and sew a dress. I have this fabric that I bought 2 yards of it for $1.99 at the thrift store. When you buy fabric at a thrift store, you usually don't get much information about what the fabric's made of, what its fiber content is, anything really about it. You just kind of have to eyeball it and know what you're looking for. So before I start making this, I thought I'd go ahead and do a burn test. I just did a burn test on fabric for another 1920s project, which I'll be showing on this channel as well. So I thought it'd be a good instruction, I guess, to do the burn test on this fabric as well. I suspect that this is just regular old polyester charmeuse. So we'll see what comes out of the burn test. Okay. In my fabric sorting video, I gave some information about burn testing. I have a good chart that I'll show you in a minute, but first let's start by observing what we see when we set this fabric on fire. Okay, so it curls away, it melts but doesn't catch on fire, and it's already creating that black hard plastic bead. So that is definitely synthetic. This is what it looks like in the end. So after you've burnt it, it's got this bead or ridge of plastic along the edge, and I can't break that off. No matter what I do, I can't get that off. So that is a very clear indicator of polyester or some kind of synthetic. And now I'm going to turn to my chart. And this chart is just something I found online, but it's really good because it goes through how it behaves. So when it comes close to the flame, what happens? While it's within the flame, what happens? Once it's removed from the flame, what happens? What does it smell like, and what is the ash like? So I think, based on what I'm seeing, that this is polyester. So it kind of fused and shrank away from the flame. It melted, didn't really burn, but it melted slowly. It did not stay on fire when I removed it from the flame, and it had a very chemical smell. And then finally, the ash, or the residue at the end, was this round, hard, black bead we see here. So anyway, it doesn't really change much of the way I'm going to make the dress. But it's just interesting to know when you have a mystery fabric that you can solve the mystery by doing a burn test. I'm working with a piece of fabric that I thrifted, which means I only have what I have. And I was able to cut the front on a fold, but the back I'm going to have to seam. And this is the underdress, so it really doesn't matter. I mean, it really wouldn't matter if it was the overdress either. But that's something you can do if your fabric isn't able to accommodate both of the pattern pieces to be on the fold. You can just seam one of them. Now, in this case, I am extending it 12 inches so that it will be underneath the lace gores. So these kind of arch-shaped pieces that are going to go on the bottom of the lace to extend the seam line, and then at the bottom of that we're going to add another piece of trim. So this will be the underdress that goes to the bottom of the gores. So you'll see I've got this piece, but I'm going to extend it 12 inches that way. Anyway, I am adding a seam allowance to the fold so I can cut two pieces, and that way I can sew it up and to make it the one piece that it should be. It'll just be in two, and that's okay. I seem to have lost all of the footage of cutting out the lace overlay for this dress, but it's the same process as this. And then instead of using wax paper to mark the darts, I used thread tracing to do that. So I don't have footage of it, but that's what happened. Now it's time to sew up the darts, which I have marked here very lightly on the wrong side of the fabric. So now I'm going to match these up. I think I can do this dart without basting it, but we'll see as I pin it. It's very slippery fabric, but it's not the worst. It's not super lightweight. So I have this little package of silk pins, and they are thinner and sharper than regular sewing pins. So we're going to give these a shot and see how this goes. This has a little bit of stretch to it, so I have to be careful to not warp it. There's my dart. A little wobbly here at the end, but it shouldn't matter too much. There it is from the other side. I will press that down, and that should be good. I already explained that I lost the footage of cutting out and thread tracing the dart on this lace fabric, but you can see I'm basting it before sewing up the dart. I didn't baste it on the satin because it was sturdy enough and I was confident that I could pin it and it would stay. I did not have the same confidence on the lace. So you have to pick and choose sometimes which techniques you use based on how the fabric is behaving. I'm going to go ahead and stitch this up. I'm going to use a straight stitch first, right along that line of stitching. I'll make sure this is nice and flat. I'm going to use a straight stitch and then go right next to it with a zigzag, and then go right next to that with a straight stitch, just to make sure that it's not going to come apart, and then I'm going to cut it. I could do a French seam, but I did some tests on a scrap piece of lace, and it worked just fine to do it this way, and it kind of makes a nice thin line instead of a big dart. And I'd rather it kind of hide into the lace a little bit instead of being an obvious dart against that silver satin. So there's the finished dart. It just hides nicely right in there. It's real thin, but it's plenty strong for what I need it to be. So that's the way to do it. I'm going to do the other side now. Hi guys, so this is where I ended up yesterday. I had to stop because my neck was killing me, but I am super excited about how this is turning out. It still looks very thick through the middle, and I'm not shaped this straight up and down at all. I definitely have more of an hourglass shape, and so, you know, it's not, is it a style I would choose for myself normally? No, it's not, but it's okay because I am pattern testing, and this is part of what it's all about. And you can see, or at least I hope you can, how unobtrusive my dart ended up being in the lace. It's just going to hide right along there where the dart is on the satin underneath. Yeah, it's about as thin as you can possibly make it there in the lace. Okay, next thing I have to do is I have to add gores. So there's these little lace pieces that come and hang down like this, and there's 8 of them total. Is that right? 6 of them total. 1 on each side seam, and 2 in the front, and 2 in the back. So in order to do that, I have to figure out how to get these markings onto that lace. So what I've been doing here is adjusting the markings based on my adjusted size, and I'm going to thread trace these over on that lace piece there. And that's going to be tedious and take a while, but I think that's the only way I know to do it. Thread trace on the lace, and then take the gores and stitch them to the thread tracing, and then pull out the tracing threads. In order to do this, I had to mark the front and then also the back so I can get each side of the dress done on there accurately. And they're not really even. So she notes on the original dress they're not super precise. So that's okay. That gives me some freedom then to not worry about being mathematically accurate with my arches and stuff like that. It's kind of been bugging me trying to get these perfect, and then I realized that I'm just going to not worry about that. So despite how this one looks so much higher than this one, this is actually the same line across here. And that's about as good as I can hope for, is that they occupy the same height and that they meet at about the same distance from the bottom of that hem. Just finished cutting out the gores, and I pinned a couple of them on here. These are the two middle gores. The blue line is thread tracing, so I thread traced all of the placement lines, and I just pinned these in place to see how it's going to look. That actually looks really nice. It's going to drape really softly from that arch and hang down, and then below that we're attaching another 12 inches of lace using the scalloped edge of this netting that I bought. So the silver slip will be hemmed to meet the line that you see there from the bottom of the gores, and then the other stuff will hang from there. I'm not sure how I feel about where it's the two layers of black lace on top of each other. It makes it a lot more opaque, and I can't decide whether I think that's going to be nice or not, but that's how it was on the original, so I'm going to leave it for now. She said that they did not cut out the under layer of fabric. But anyway, I got everything cut out. Those gores are fabric hogs. I didn't have to worry about it on the lace because it's lace, but if you're using chiffon, you have to cut them on the bias, and that will really hog up a lot of fabric, so just FYI. This is perhaps the most fiddly piece of sewing I've ever done. In the last clip, I showed you how I had thread traced the placement lines, but now it's time for me to sew on the gore, and the issue is that they are stitched inside this pocket here. So they're stitched from the inside, which takes a little bit of doing, but it's not hard. So the placement line worked brilliantly. What really was helpful though was putting a piece of white tissue paper underneath this. If I were working with chiffon, it might be a little easier to manage, but with the lace, it was really hard to see where I had to go. So I just placed this piece on a piece of tissue, and then I was able to go in and stitch just very carefully along here by hand. It actually didn't take that long, it just was kind of fiddly. So I'll film the next one so you can see how it goes, but I'm actually really liking how it's turned out. This is really lovely. And it's a nice detail at the bottom of the dress. This is free right here, and the next gore will come right up to there, and then the gores will be stitched together to the end. So that now I'm going to worry about these arches first, and then I'll go back and stitch together the gores. What I've done is marked the center of the top of the gore with a pin, and then I'm just going to line that up with the center of the top of where I've thread traced the placement onto the dress. And I'm going to start with a little stitch about 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. And now I can pull that pin out and just slowly work my way along here. I do find it's easiest to work from the top down one side and then knot your thread, and then work from the top down the other side, because the second side is a little trickier, and it just keeps you from putting too much tension on your fabric. So I just kind of look and eyeball. I put in a few extra stitches on this top part here just to anchor it in place when I'm going right along that blue placement line that I thread traced. And I do find it helps to anchor the fabric with my fabric weights. I do believe this would be easier on chiffon because your needle keeps wanting to get caught up in the lace. And of course I'm putting my hand, I guess, in between. I'm not left-handed, but this is easy enough. So we'll just do a little bit of a running stitch right along that line. And then gradually ease your way around. Put a back stitch in here to anchor it. And I just give it a little bit of a stretch every so often to ensure that I'm not putting too much tension on my thread. So, running back stitch. For every 2 or 3 running stitches, you do 1 back stitch, and it just kind of keeps it from bunching up. It's fiddly, but it's not difficult, and it actually goes fairly quickly. I don't mind some hand sewing as long as I can do it with my wrist injury. This is fairly easy, and I can just take my time with it. The white tissue paper behind there really helps. It helps to see what I'm doing and where my edge of my fabric is. Yeah, lace is challenging, but I love the look against the silver satiny stuff that I have for the underdress. So it's worth it to me to have a little bit of extra effort here. Okay, so that's the first side down. Now before I tie it off, I'm just going to make sure it's not gathered or puckered. Okay, so now that's how it looks. Nice and neat. And it's plenty secure. It doesn't need to be super, super tight on there. I'm going to do the rest of these gores off camera. Each of these gores has to be sewn together down the length. So after you set them onto the dress, you have to stitch the ends of them together. I was going to do that by hand, and I thought I'd just come over to the machine and see how it works to do it by machine, and it actually works just fine and will save me a whole bunch of time. So the issue right now is just, trying to figure out which is the right side, which is the wrong side of each of these things. I may have just done one of them incorrectly, which would totally suck. Nope, I did it right. It's just really tough to see in this lace. So I would recommend just take your time, make sure before you get to going that that you've got the right pieces going to the right pieces and that the seam will be on the correct side. The trick for getting this to go through without it eating your fabric, go really slow, and then you can grab a hold of the tail and help the fabric go back. So that's why I'm just going to hang on to this tail here. I'm going to go kind of slow, back stitch, and then just make sure that tail keeps pulling the fabric out. I am doing a 1/4 inch seam. And that should be good enough. I'm not bothering to pin. I'm just going to go slow and adjust my fabric as I stitch. If your machine gets away from you and you have a machine like mine, you can set a governor on it. I can adjust mine to 3 speed settings, and that way if I've got something I really need to be careful about, I can turn it down so I can't sew too quickly. Another tip is if your fabric starts to bunch up, put your needle in the fabric. Sometimes the top will stretch out and go at a different rate than the bottom, and so if that starts to get bunchy on you, just take a second, leave your needle down, lift your presser foot, rearrange everything, lower your presser foot, and continue on. And there you go. So I'll need to do that to all 6 gores just to attach them together along their lengths. All right, so she's got a terrible case of static cling, but here's what these flounces look like. Very nice. They really, really look great. And so the flounces ended up making just a straight edge along the bottom. And you can see that my underslip is longer than that edge because I wanted to give myself plenty just in case I had measured wrong. So now I know where I can mark the hem and I can finish the underskirt with a simple narrow hem. Then I'm going to sew an additional 12 inches of lace onto the bottom of this. And that's got the border on it, the scallop border, so that's going to be beautiful. So I need to sew that on next. I'll do the hem and I'll do that. Rather than buying an additional piece of trim, I just, decided to use the scallop border from the piece of lace that I had. Okay, so here's the issue. My big cloth was 108 inches long, and I need 144 inches of this 12-inch trim. So I'm going to have to piece this together. And with lace, it's actually really easy to do because you can just lay the one piece on top of the other piece until the pattern matches and then stitch it together, trim away the excess, and it's kind of a hidden seam. I mean, you can see the line, but it's not bulky and it's not intrusive. So let me show you how I'm going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and lay this on top until I can match up those patterns. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you just want it to be as seamless as you can make it. Now I'm going to pin it just in a couple spots, and I'll take it to my machine and zigzag over the join. So I'm going to zigzag right along the edge here where that bottom piece meets the top piece. And then I'll trim away the extra, and you'll see how nice and neat and clean that looks. So I've done my zigzag stitch right along here, and this is the fabric that I'm going to cut away. So I'm just going to go very slowly, and I could use a smaller scissor, but my smallest scissors are a little dull, and I'd prefer the sharpness. So just go very slowly. Make sure you're not cutting through both layers of the fabric. Kind of helps to lift it up and let gravity give you a hand. Nice neat seam. So I'm going to finish evening this up at the top so the whole strip is exactly 12 inches long, and then I can start pinning it to the bottom of my dress. Off camera, I prepared some satin seam binding and stitched it around the armholes, and I did baste. You'll see that red thread, that's basting, so that the lace and the satin stay together while I bind them. This is what I'm going to do for the neckline. So it's rhinestone trim and the bias binding. And I had to practice a couple times to see how to make that work. And the best way to do it is to do it by hand. So I'm going to start by stitching the seam binding nice and tight next to that rhinestone trim, and then I'll trim off the excess of this white mesh that the rhinestones are on. And then I will hand sew it to the neckline and flip it up and over, and that's how I will finish this neckline here. I tried doing this by machine and I just could not get my zipper foot close enough. The rhinestone trim was just a little bit bulky, and so none of the sewing machine feet I had would work, which is fine. This doesn't take too terribly long to do it, except when your thread tangles. I hate when this happens. Beeswax is great for hand sewing. I don't have any beeswax, so it is on my list of things that I'd like to get, because when you wax your thread, it goes through a lot easier and doesn't tangle up. The trim is really smooth around the armholes, but not so much around the neck. There we go. So I think as I was navigating these turns, I ended up pulling and twisting it a little bit too much. I love how it looks, but except for the wrinkles. So I'm going to redo it, I think, which I hate to even say because I spent quite a bit of time yesterday doing it. But I think what happened was I started from the center back and worked my way around to the front and then back up and around again. And I probably should have started from the front center and gone up in one direction and then the front center and back in the other direction, so that any wrinkling would have been more hidden along the back instead of being in the front. So right here in the front, I had to do a mitered corner, and it's just really tight, and see there's a big wrinkle right there. So I'm going to try and ease that up a little bit, but otherwise I am thrilled with how this dress turned out. It's very pretty, and the lace was beautiful. So we'll see. I just loosened it up a little bit and tacked it back down, and it's laying a lot better now than it was before. The other thing I did was, after trying it on, I actually took the underdress in by a full 6 inches at the waist. I just couldn't handle the straight up and down on a body like mine. When you have big boobs and a very small, well, not very small, but comparatively small waist, the last thing you want is to cover up your waist because it looks like you've gained 60 pounds. It still tends a little bit more than I would like, but I think that's just a function of 20s style. But anyway, I like it. It looks nice in the end. It's not my favorite decade of style, but this dress is beautiful, and the construction was a lot of fun, and I like the way it turned out. I especially liked the little rhinestone deal right here. I finally had a chance to get some pictures taken with hair and makeup and some accessories. I don't have a lot in the way of historical shoes and jewelry and stuff like that, so I kind of made do with what I had. You'll have to forgive the shoes in the pictures here. They're not exactly 1920s shoes, but it was the best thing I had, and they are silver, so they kind of match the dress. But anyway, I had a lot of fun playing around with doing a historical hairstyle. I would like to do more pictures someday. I'd like to go outside where there's a pretty building, and spring is coming, so maybe we'll have some greenery, and so you can look for more pictures of this dress on Instagram in the weeks and months to come. But anyway, let me tell you a little bit more about how I feel about this project and the 1920s in general. I just can't say enough about how much fun I had with the process and how thrilled I am with the end result. I struggled surprisingly with my body image with this project. I kept thinking, oh, if I wasn't so curvy, it would look better on me. Or if I was, thinner, this style or this decade of fashion, this silhouette would look better on me. And, you have to sew for the body you have and not necessarily the body you want. And so what I was able to do with this dress is adapt it just like a woman of my shape would have had to do for the fashion of the time in the 20s. I'm not the first person to be built like this, and I am in my 40s. So a woman in her 40s in 1920 would have been trying to figure out how to step forward with her fashion in a way that still suited her age and maybe her more womanly or matronly body, right? Having kids, time, all changes the shape of your body. And, back when she was a young woman, she would have been wearing, structured garments and really buttoned up stuff and lots of shaping and close fitting stuff. And it would have been hard to make the adjustment to something very loose like a 1920s style. So I just kind of put my 1920s 47-year-old woman hat on and said, what would I have done? Well, I would have made changes to make it fit my body. So that is putting in a dart where I needed a dart and not trying to fight it, right? That's one piece of it. Taking out some of the ease in the waist is another thing that I did. It didn't change it from a 20s silhouette. It's still very identifiable as a 1920s dress, but it's a little more flattering on me. And I think we need to have the freedom to do that because these are real clothes. These aren't costumes for the people who wore them in the day. They're real clothes, and they wanted to look and feel their best too, just like we do. So if you are going to embark on historical costuming, like this is my first time, but I certainly intend to do this as I move forward, to not be afraid to make little tweaks here and there, to make adjustments to the clothes, to flatter your body so that they're wearable, so that you feel good in them. And it's just what everybody would have done. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this project. I don't know when I'll have a chance to wear this, but I do hope I have time to go to some kind of a costuming event since it is the 20s. So if you like this video, there's more coming. I have my other 1920s outfit. This time it's a day dress, so it's something you would have worn out and about to go to the store, to go to lunch, to run errands, to go to church, that kind of thing. So I can't wait to share it with you. I've got that video coming out probably in another week or so, and I hope that you'll subscribe so that you don't miss it. You can also follow me on Instagram. I'll put my handle in the description box below, and I'll put all kinds of links and other information that you need if you're interested in recreating this dress, because all of these patterns are available for free at the exhibition website. So make sure you go check it out. There's 5 different 1920s patterns free for the taking, so you can make your own dress just like this one. All right, thanks a lot. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.